So hello and welcome to another episode of the Bitstocks podcast, and I have here none other than Jimmy of nChain and also the founding president of the Bitcoin Association.
I'm really happy to be here. You're one of my favorite people to talk to always about Bitcoin and all things life.
Do you know what? I have been insanely excited to have you on.
Oh, thank you.
Reason being is this is a new approach for us here at Bitstocks.
Okay.
I want this podcast, this format, to get behind the brand of people and even to a certain degree, put our businesses to the side. I want this to be more about understanding the human being behind some of the key figureheads within this space. What drives us, what motivates us, maybe certain things that have formed and shaped who we are today, and maybe even uncover some areas or some boxes that might be a little bit uncomfortable to speak about, but something that you know yourself has shaped who you are today. So with all that being said, how are you, Jimmy?
I'm well. I'm tired.
I can imagine.
But I'm well. It's, especially since the beginning of this year, it's a new year, but, we have a lot of work we're doing to support the growth of BitcoinSV as an entire ecosystem and rebirth original Bitcoin. And that's a lot of work. So I've been traveling a lot. I have been engaging with a lot of businesses and conversations. So I'm excited, but in all honesty, I'm tired.
I can imagine. I remember the conversation we had a few months back, and you were jumping between Asia, America, and anywhere in between within very quick succession of each other as well. And then you was back in London for another conversation. Your air miles must be insane.
Yes, this year I'm actually trying to organize my life a little bit better in chunks in parts of the world, as opposed to a lot of the back and forth. So for the beginning of the year, I spent 6 weeks in Asia and Australia, partly for, some New Year's holiday with some friends in Bangkok, but then knowing that I had a series of conferences, speaking engagements, events, business meetings in Asia and things I could plan, I started to just map it out. So, you know what, instead of going back and forth, I'm just going to base out of Asia for 6 weeks. Then I got back to the United States for a week and a half, and then I got here to London last week, and I'm here till 2 more days. Then I fly back to the US for a couple of days before doing a swing to other places.
What's your base? What would you consider home?
So I have lived almost my entire life in Los Angeles since my family came to the U.S. from Vietnam. I grew up in the Southern California area and always stayed in L.A. So I'm very much a California Los Angelino. And much to my surprise, I now have to say I live in Seattle. Now, I don't say that disappointingly, but in December of last year, after I saw you last at the CoinGeek week events in London, went back to Los Angeles, and my partner Neil and I packed up and we moved to Seattle. So it's home base. I haven't spent a lot of time there since I've been there, because I was there for about a week and a half, then went back to LA to see my parents for Christmas, then went to Asia, and then when I got back to the US, was there for another week and a half. But now it's Seattle. Seems strange to say out loud because I feel like I'm such an LA person.
And especially considering the nChain London, the nChain HQ is London.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So it's inspiring. It really is inspiring. It's challenging, and I find it even difficult to imagine myself doing that stuff. And we have our Gravity tour plan. We're mapping it all out for this year. And I'm looking at the potential tour dates and all these different locations, and the simulation that keeps on going through my mind. Look at what Jimmy's doing. Look at what Craig's doing. Look what these boys are doing. They're going all around the world and still putting out the content that you guys are putting out as well, putting out the work that you're putting out, being the glue in this community and in this industry, speaking to merchants, speaking to big businesses, trying to convince these people to look at this technology and take it seriously. So to combine all of that and then somehow maintain some form of family life and some stable base can't be easy.
No, luckily I don't have children or pets. or really any plants. You know, I'm the guy, you don't want me to keep any living thing alive in your home because I'm just not capable of it. I'm like the guy who killed a cactus once years ago. Like literally I moved when I was, a couple years out of law school. I moved into this condo in LA in West Hollywood. A friend of mine came with a housewarming gift and said, okay, I'm giving you a cactus because even you cannot kill a cactus.
Yeah.
And then 2 years later, I moved out of that place and the movers came in and said, what do you want us to do with this black thing on the balcony? I said, what black thing? And it was like a shriveled up cactus. I had left there for 2.5 years. So no, luckily I'm more mobile because of that. And most importantly, and this is where I have to thank my partner in life, Neil, I have a partner who's able to travel with me, not all the time, but a lot of the time, because otherwise this life wouldn't work, right? You couldn't maintain a relationship and a personal life. But it is hard. I do feel sometimes, being on the road, as I'm sure you know, can be isolating as much as it is busy. And you find yourself working at odd hours in hotel rooms by yourself, eating by yourself on the road in a car in an airport. But luckily Neil's able to travel with me a lot. He was with me for a big chunk of the time in Asia. He's not here with me now in London, but next month in April when I have another Europe swing, he's going to come with me. So that's been critical to it because otherwise I couldn't go for such long stretches. But
that must help massively.
The way I look at it, and I've talked with Craig about this as well, we're on a mission. This isn't a job. It started as, an interesting job opportunity. It has turned into a mission.
That very beautifully leads me into one of the first points I really want to cover here. Because I don't just ever listen or view something and just see the most obvious piece of information. I look for the little details and the signs. I look for how people say what they say, right? There's more to words than just the word itself. There's also tone, tonality, body language, etc. And
the nonverbal often expresses more than the verbal.
Exactly. And if I look at the CoinGeek event, the London event, okay, as a host, you completely blew that event away. Absolutely blew that event away. And that's a week. So to keep that kind of energy and that momentum and that buzz and that drive and your story narration, which I want to get onto as well, people should pay attention to Jimmy's presentations. Go back, watch some of Jimmy's presentations. As a storyteller, you're brilliant. You have a beginning, you have a middle, and even when sometimes you think that you've gone a little bit offline, you always loop it back to the very thing that you started with. This is one of the key fundamental things and skills to have with storytelling. So something that I always respected you for was your ability to narrate and to tell stories and to always loop things back to why it is that you started in the first place, what the subject matter was in the first place. And how you closed the CoinGeek event was powerful, really, really powerful.
The growing up kids pictures,
Because you emailed me about that, right?
Yeah, I got kids' pictures from you.
Yeah,
right.
You emailed me. I think it was about a week before the CoinGeek event. And there was no detail in this email, really. It was just like, oh, Mike, have you got some photos of you when you was a kid? I was like...
what is that for? What's Jimmy going to do with my kids' pictures?
I was like, I do. And here they are. And I think I sent them to you. I didn't even ask you why, but I was sitting there, I was like, here's the images. I can imagine you're going to use it in some way that's going to be beneficial for the event, but I was curious.
So what did you think when you saw it?
So I was in the front row.
Yeah.
I think it was Craig to this side, and I think just saw someone from the event on my left-hand side. And all the images were flashing. And you was closing the event, and as what you was saying was building up and it was getting to the endpoints, and you was making the point about the journeys it is that we have taken and who these people are who are so influential within this space, and anchoring a message in our consciousness that we all ultimately were children, and we still are children. We're now grown up to be men, and we are now the men who are changing the world as we see fit. You sincerely and genuinely welled up.
Yeah,
I saw it in your eyes. I was sitting right in front of you. I saw it in your eyes. This really is a mission for you.
Yeah, and also It is a mission because I spend so much time with Craig, and I've learned about what his mission is. And I've always wanted something to do in my life where I could really build and create something that was going to help the world. It's why I left a very long time, comfortable, lucrative, legal partnership life, right? And it is. And the other reason I did that approach with showing the kids videos is, one, I wanted to emphasize the theme of that whole conference, which was it's time for Bitcoin to grow up and professionalize. But whenever I speak, one of the things I've learned, not just about storytelling, but communicating to people, is even if we're talking about a technical topic, such as Bitcoin, which can get very hyper-technical, as you know, and I think that has been a big mistake of the sort of previous evolutions of the Bitcoin community, focusing too much only on just technical explanations. People react to the human touch, right? And I don't do it in every single presentation because you can't come up with ideas all the time, but I remember getting ready for that, and that was a very difficult conference to get ready for. It was right after the hash war was over. You have no idea the number of hours and
I remember sitting down with you, where did we go? We went to Vapiano's around the corner from your office. And this was in the midst of the hash wars really breaking out. And I remember asking you, I was like, Jimmy, fuck, are we going to have anyone at CoinGeek?
Right.
Like, I was like, is anyone actually going to be at CoinGeek? Because right now, it just seems like it's all blown up.
Right, exactly.
Like, it all literally just went crazy and blew up. So,
but people came, and I think that community really reunited. It happened at a great time, but it was exhausting to put together that, like, immediately after the conclusion of the hash war and the emergence of BitcoinSV. So the reason I didn't ask you for those pictures until right before is I didn't think of the idea until, in probably the week or so before. And I wanted a way to humanize what we were doing, to leave things with an emotional touch. It's something I have found very effective in my entire public speaking career, because at the end of the day, people react to feelings as much as they react to information and knowledge. And that's a big difference between how Craig and I have sort of approached our explanations and discussions and presentations about Bitcoin.
Well, you can feel a mallet.
Yeah, I know, right? I say it all the time now internally. It's like I'm more like Bitcoin Oprah, right? I think it's important to have empathy, right? And I think it's important to make people feel. I want people to feel that the journey we're taking and the mission we're taking with Bitcoin is not just about great technology or making a lot of money because people want to get the next, the Bitcoin that's going to shoot to the moon. And all those things are great and nice. There's nothing wrong with that.
But they're a byproduct.
They're a bit of a byproduct. I am happiest when I make people feel good about what they're doing. It's something I've thought about a long time in sort of my younger and professional careers, where I used to mentor a lot of people and I used to coach a lot of people. I used to coach a college speech and debate team for many years. And there's something I find really rewarding and satisfying about making people really feel good about themselves and what they're doing. And so I try to think of things about how do I leave an emotional touch. And it's the thing I also realized as I entered this world of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency that differentiated me from how everyone else approached it, right? Like I always think about if I'm going to work in some environment, some organization, some world, what's my unique touch print I'm going to leave on it.
And that's a powerful thing in itself, because having a sense of self is it's a long journey. For me personally, it's been a long, very, very long journey. We all have had that negative voice that pops up in the corner of our brain, right, telling us what we can't do. And then you have this other voice that pops up telling the other voice to shut the fuck up.
Correct, yeah.
I have dominion over this vessel and I will move forward based on what my will is to move forward. But saying that is one thing, and to say that is so easy. And even having knowledge to a certain degree isn't that difficult, right? It's the encapsulation of information from other individuals. However, acting on knowledge is a very different kettle of fish.
Correct.
It really, really is a very different kettle of fish. And something that I have found in my life more recently is having complete ownership of self. And with that, having the comfortability of knowing what my flaws are and being okay with them. And because if I know what they are, it's up to me now when to decide when to work on those flaws. But also, really importantly, know my strengths and being okay with my strength and if appropriate, sing them from the rooftops if required.
Absolutely. To backtrack a little bit, one basic reason I take those approaches, like I did at the CoinGeek week with the growing up videos and theme, is just a basic communication strategy, right? I was a communication studies major in college. I have been in the speech and debate world much of my, young and adult life in the, high school and college. And there are things we teach, which is very simple, that when people listen to a speech, a presentation, event, you can only remember so much.
Yeah.
So themes are really important, and themes that resonate with people and that create a feeling. And something that can be repeated. So it's a very basic approach, but I'm sure you see a lot of public speakers just don't follow it because they just don't think about it, a beginning, a middle, and the end. You're right. It's telling a story. It's having a theme, something that threads throughout what you're doing that you can tie back to. We call it bookending. You start with one thing, you end with the other. Those are very fundamental concepts and principles in speech communication.
So doing a bit of a deep dive on your bio and your history and your upbringing, your father was a huge influence for you, wasn't he, in regards to storytelling?
I think later in life in particular. I think when I was younger, not so much. Not in a bad way, but I think when I was younger, I felt closer to my mother than my father, and I think a lot of what that had to do with is my father seemed scarier when I was younger. And in hindsight, I realized as an adult, I have a lot more in common with my father. And I think it's also because of sort of the work situations when, so my parents, we were immigrants to the United States. I was 2 years old when my family left Vietnam to come to the United States. And as immigrants in a country where they don't speak the language, they had to take all kinds of odd jobs. So my parents worked a lot. And so I didn't see my father as much at home after school, for example, as I see my mother. My mother worked as well, but she would get home earlier, in the day than my father would. So I think I spent less time with him. And I think it was as I got older and you start thinking about those things like, what do I want to do with my life? What do I want to study? That I understood the commonalities of my father more. It's one of the reasons, I chose law school. There was a number of reasons. One, I was successful in speech and debate, and a lot of speakers and debaters, in high school and college go into law school. It's a very logical career path, right? You get to be an advocate, and there's a lot of logical thinking involved. But my father was a federal judge in South Vietnam, and always wanted one of his sons to follow in his footsteps. My older brother did not. He got his degrees in engineering. And so it was always in the back of my mind. And I sometimes wondered, did I go to law school and become a lawyer just because of my father? Because it was not because that was the thing I absolutely had to do. It was a logical choice. But as I did that and sort of started down that journey and would talk to him more about things in law, and as you get older and talk to your parents about more sophisticated things, I realized I'm a lot more like him than I ever thought when I was a kid.
Yeah. It's insane how that works out, right?
It is. It's also, and I have a bit more of a challenging situation because of a language sort of indirect barrier, where I spoke Vietnamese as a kid, but I don't speak it very well now. So I don't really speak Vietnamese to my parents. They speak to me in English, which is, very good, decent English, right? But it's not fluent because they're not, native fluent speakers. And then I speak back to them in English. And so we have conversations, but it's more challenging to have conversations about really personal things.
Because when you left Vietnam, you was just a child, right?
I was
just
two.
a toddler.
Yeah, I don't remember any of it. I have a faint memory, I think, of being on an airplane.
And how old were your parents?
So my father and my mother, my father would have been about 40 or 39, and my mother would have been about 36, 37. Yeah, I was the youngest of 4 kids. So there's 2 older kids, a big age gap of 7 years, my other sister than me. So so they had me a little bit later than life. I was actually the accident.
That's what my parents told me.
Yeah, I was the accident, yeah.
So I find it interesting because it's amazing that how close to home stories that show perfect examples and advertisements really for the importance of Bitcoin in the world really are. I mean, David, our CTO here, he speaks 5 languages.
Wow.
And it was only, I've known the guy knocking on the door of a decade. And it was only about 18 months ago, we were just randomly talking. I was like, David, why the bloody hell do you actually speak 5 languages? It's incredibly impressive. Like, don't get me, it's incredibly impressive. But
absolutely.
why do you speak 5 languages? And it was from the collapse of the Soviet Union. His dad, his parents were incredibly successful. His dad had he was a mechanic, he had shops, and really, really great reputation. Collapsed Soviet Union, that then went from a variety of different countries and eventually ended up in France. But it was instability after instability after instability. And it's interesting because for people who have had that kind of geopolitical instability or that economic instability that comes off the back of that, I asked him, I was like, have you asked your parents about what their opinion is of Bitcoin if you explain it to them adequately? And they get it straight away because they've been from financial stability to then queuing up for bread.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So when I was looking into your history and I was actually looking into it, it's these early things really can show you just how important Bitcoin really is to the world. And
absolutely.
Have you ever had a conversation with your parents about Bitcoin because of the history? And what are their views?
Good question.
On it?
Well, I have had a conversation with my father about Bitcoin when I was driving him down in the car. My dad's older now, so he doesn't drive as much. And so one time I came home for Father's Day and decided to drive him down from where my parents live to Little Saigon. There's a huge Vietnamese community about 45 minutes away from where my parents live in Southern California. So he likes to go down there every Sunday to eat Vietnamese food and see things he's familiar with. But, he doesn't, it's dangerous for him to drive that far now, so he doesn't do it. So I drove down to take him. And so I'm in the car and I have to explain to my parents at this time. And I thought I was a little, I don't want to say concerned about it, but I'm having to tell my dad, who was so proud that his son has been a lawyer all these years. I was a lawyer for 21 years in the US. I'm like, Dad, I'm actually have left, right? And I'm doing something else. And one of the things I've learned is because my father doesn't speak like perfect American English, right? People think he's not intelligent. And I think I even made the mistake when I was younger of thinking he's less intelligent than he actually is.
And you knew he was a judge.
Yes, right? But it just because, he doesn't register to you. And as I'm older, I realize how bright and smart he is. And so I'm having to explain to him I left law and I'm now working with this company in this thing called Bitcoin, which
Magic
makes
internet money.
No sense to, my, in the idea of, my Vietnamese immigrant parents. But
whenabouts was this? How long ago?
Oh, this was a few years ago, right? Yeah. And so that was I had a conversation with him where I tried to explain to him, I said, it's kind of like the internet again, but with money, right? And try to explain it to him. We didn't get into sort of comparisons with Vietnam, but when I get done with the story, I'll tell you another story that I think is really relevant. And then we talked about it and he went, much to my surprise, he was very encouraging of you know what? That sounds like good opportunity. Go do it, right? If you want to do that, that's great. And I think he was so happy and proud that his son was getting even bigger opportunities than he would thought. And then about a month or two later, I was back home at my parents' house again. He says, I read about that Bitcoin. And my father actually does talk like this, so don't think this is racist, right? My parents do actually speak like this. It's not their fault. That he said, I read about that Bitcoin thing in Vietnamese newspaper. Because there's a Vietnamese, regional newspaper in Southern California. Because they have some conference in Vietnam about the Bitcoin. Sound very exciting. Good opportunity, right? And so I've had those conversations, but not so much how it relates. But as you sit here talking about that, the one analogy I would make about why this is so important for people from developing or war-torn countries is I think about my parents' journey from, my dad was poor in Vietnam. My mom was from a more, established family. They get married and my dad, still has to work very hard. He was in the South Vietnamese military, then put himself through law school, became a judge. And so by the time they left, they were, fairly well off by Vietnam standards, not mega wealthy or anything, but, comfortable. And then you have to lose it and leave with 4 kids, 2 babies. My parents left, each parent with a bag of clothing in one arm and a baby in the other arm, right? And then you get on an aircraft carrier that the U.S. government sends in to help the South Vietnamese government and military-related families out. And then are taken to the United States where You don't know the language. You have to get a job and start all over again. And the money you had, the currency you had, in South Vietnamese currency, then becomes worthless. And my parents took out actually paper currency with them because I remember playing with it as a kid, like Monopoly money, South Vietnamese dong, right? That just becomes Monopoly money because it's now all of a sudden worthless because the government that issued it has disappeared. But the one thing that did have value is that my mother, knowing that Saigon was at risk of falling for a number of months, started converting whatever value the family had into gold.
Interesting. Very
and
smart. Very smart.
She was scared about taking it out of the country and having it stolen. So she wrapped pieces of gold in a piece of fabric and tied it underneath her clothing around her stomach. And that's how she took gold out of Vietnam to the United States. And when my family first got to the United States, they were sponsored into the country by a church. A lot of churches and charitable organizations helped countries in who helped put my parents in an apartment. And so there was, our whole family living in a little 2-bedroom apartment. And they were working just kind of, odd minimum wage jobs, right? My dad's first job was an orderly in a nursing home. My mom worked in a big giant sewing factory. But through a lot of years of working, they saved up money. And then they went to tell the landlord, who wasn't very nice to our family at the time, right, that, we're moving because we bought a house. And the landlord's, my mom says, try to make fun of her going, well, you guys can't afford to buy a house, right? And it's because my mother had brought the gold to the United States and sold it. And that was the down payment on their first house. And so the lesson of it is, how do you create, related to Bitcoin, something that has a universal
measurement,
permanent value that sustains irrespective of a government, right? Somebody that issued it, or other geopolitical or other factors that could change the value of it. Really does. I had not thought about the analogy to that until I was sitting here.
But it really is an apt one and a beautiful one because, and this really is the points that I was trying to hammer home in my CoinGeek talk, right? Because I was divided on what to do and what approach to go down because my burning desire is to spread truth. But at the same time, I was there to obviously unveil gravity,
of course.
Speak about what it is that we're up to. But I couldn't do one without the other. So I had to lay a foundation and then speak about what our solution is to the challenges I see the world being presented with. And this is really how I've been able to make the tie between money and time. If you really look at things primitively, okay? If we go back to the example with your family and your parents, you said that they were financially stable in
South Vietnam,
in Vietnamese standards, right. Financially stable, and then essentially had to relocate,
leave everything,
start again.
Yes.
And if you look at that from a time factor, how much time do you feel was actually robbed from your parents in that scenario, in that situation, by starting again? It
wasn't even just time. It was whether, especially because coming to a country where my father learned English, got a waiver of the educational requirement by taking law and night school classes. So he didn't have to get a law degree in the US because he had his degree from Vietnam, and try to take the California bar, become a lawyer, did not pass. Law is a very language-based profession. So couldn't do what he did in Vietnam. And so for me, the thing where I relate to my father so much, especially because I've done it in the US, I know how hard it is and how hard it would have been to just walk away from the career and life you had. But they lost not just time, but the opportunity with resources they had built up to start with something more, right? Because think about it this way, had Bitcoin existed back then and the country had fallen, South Vietnam fell, right? And they could have left to the United States with their Bitcoin, right? And use that value to start a new life in the US. What different choices could they have made? It's not just time. Would they have just been needed to take any random odd job? Could they have started a business, right? Could they have lived in different neighborhoods, right? Where the schools were better for me and my siblings at first, right? We lived in a not as great neighborhood in the beginning, and before high school, my parents were insistent on being able to move so that my one sister and I could go to a better high school, right? And So it's not just time that's lost. It's about
Sound
an
money.
opportunity that was lost because all the value they had built up through years of work.
Sound money affords you the opportunity to make sovereign decisions, right? So if we have this world, we've got 180 different variants, 180 different ways of measuring someone's effectively their time and their skill.
Correct.
Right. So we guise this under the labor market, right? We call this our labor markets, but ultimately the more skillful somebody is, the more it condenses the labor it takes in order to perform that task. So this is how they're correlated. If you have 180 different ways of doing that, you've got all of these pockets, these different measuring sticks of how time, money, skill,
Sure.
Is being measured. And then you look at the stats and you look at the evidence, you see that there's 4,000 different variants of government money that's existed. The average lifespan's 27 years, right?
Which is very short.
Incredibly short.
Incredibly, right, yeah.
Worryingly short. Right?
Yes.
And because when we've had discussions and talk about a one reference way, one world currency, one way of establishing somebody's time and therefore their skill, it's always plagued with all of these negative Illuminati-esque conspiracy theories and all these crazy theories. And there's credence in a lot of those theories because this goes back to the point that I keep making about the fact that crypto needs to grow up, is if you have that built on anonymity, and the way the world runs today, there are pockets of anonymity. There's ways of moving money around that people who are in positions of power had the advantage of being able to utilize. Now, when you have this, you create all of these pockets, and it's easy for power to be concentrated within these pockets. Having a public way, a public ledger, a public system, a public reference value of establishing our time and our skill, then the world is truly liberated. This is how I see Bitcoin. This is how I've always seen Bitcoin. And I think people take the whole idea of decentralization too literally. In fact, it's very misunderstood.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with you.
Very, very misunderstood. And
it's distorted.
And it has a very weird neighbor, which is socialism as well. It's because people then look at, say, proof of stake based systems, and people have the mentality that because it's free, equal, open access, that somehow this is also an equal distribution of funds.
Correct, right.
Something I've seen Craig obviously speak out against.
Craig is very opposed to that, yes.
And I agree with that. I really, really, really agree with that. And I feel like there is so much overspill from how the way that society has been run up until this point, which has failure, bankruptcy, political instabilities baked into the system. It's literally baked into the system. And our day-to-day actions are consequences of how ultimately the core system is structured. And I feel like this is where some people, in fact, a large majority of people within the cryptocurrency community have misjudged this. I don't think they're coming from bad places, but I do think they've misjudged how the old guard really works, how the system really works, how society has been constructed and why it's been constructed this way. And they have taken that as something that can't be changed from within and something that can only be boycotted and argued against. And this is what creates this anarchist undertone.
Correct.
To the cryptocurrency
It's us
community.
versus them as opposed to something that all works together.
And this is why I really want to step away from, I guess, even the brand of Bitstocks or even a brand of nChain. Right now, this is Michael Hudson and Jimmy Nguyen having a conversation, right? And I feel like if we go back to that, if we look at that and we really understand that, at least for the most part, we have good intentions. For the most part, we can pretty much agree that we have good intentions. Most people in this community have good intentions. We have different ideals as to how to fulfill those intentions, but I think for the most part, we all have good intentions. And because there is so much misinformation being spread out there, not just about cryptocurrencies, okay? In fact, I think crypto right now really is a kind of a piss in the ocean in comparison to the bigger, grander issues that has made this relevant, right? I've always argued, and I've said this for years, if you understand why Bitcoin was invented, what it's really all about, then you can start understanding its value. But you have to understand the why before you understand.
Why do you think it was invented?
Well, for me with Bitcoin, it was about establishing value, a way of measuring value in one measurement, okay? And it was, people take the whole storage of value, digital gold, that I don't see as the be all and end all. It's a component that Bitcoin can do, and Bitcoin can.
But that's not why Bitcoin was created, right? Yeah, that's like an after the fact explanation for what's going on now.
What I see Bitcoin ultimately is bathing the world in light, engulfing the world in light, because you can't have a privacy-based blockchain, because that would just engulf the world in darkness, complete, utter darkness. If the whole world was run on top of, say, Monero.
I'll correct that a bit. I think you can have a privacy protecting blockchain, but you can't have an anonymity-driven blockchain.
Agreed. So that I agreed on, because privacy still can be very much maintained.
You can,
and you have the right to.
Right. There are things you can do to protect privacy to a certain degree that we would reasonably expect. And, Craig says this all the time, Bitcoin is pseudonymous. It's not anonymous. There are privacy features in it, but it's not the full-on privacy coin that people want in other coins, which are really anonymous transactions. And so that's the difference.
So my view of Bitcoin has evolved over the years. Massively had a jolt about 3.5 years ago, about 3 years ago, actually, when Craig burst back onto the scene.
Oh, I remember.
So
Arnhem, Netherlands.
It was even before that.
Even before that.
It was before that. It was when he appeared on Skype. Nick Sasbo was on a panel, I think Trace Mayer.
Las Vegas.
Yeah, that's the one.
Got it. Yep.
And I was sitting there and I was watching it and I was like, well, not live, I was watching it on the internet. And I had no idea who Craig was, but I was like, this guy is schooling everyone on this panel. At that point, I didn't even know if what he was saying was accurate. But I was like, the confidence of this man is endearing. I'm going to look into it. I'm going to look into him. And that was the day I created a file on Craig. And I've been slotting information into that file ever since, up until the point where I eventually met him. And the thing that blew me away...
Was that Hong Kong?
Yeah, that was the first time. Then I realized you guys are bloody in London. Right? So just round the corner, I went all the way to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
But what blew me away was the angle that Craig was coming from, the network model that he showed and displayed for Bitcoin.
Right.
I had already been doing my own studies, my own research, things completely unrelated to Bitcoin. I just have an addiction and a fascination to ultimately how consciousness works, how the universe works, how it all applies, and the mathematics that everything is governed by, the true laws of nature. So that's something that I've been studying, genetics, etc. It's something I've been studying for a while now. And then Craig burst on the scene and he presents Bitcoin in a way that I have never seen anyone present Bitcoin before. So instantly, interest has now peaked massively once Craig burst on the scene for that. And
it mimics systems in nature.
Yes. Yeah. And then he said Bitcoin is biologically inspired.
Correct.
Okay. And that just set me off the edge.
And people don't, I think that gets lost a lot in the conversation.
Massively.
I remember the first time I heard him say that in the office to me or something. We were on the whiteboard looking at some diagram or something. And so it's a very, as Oprah would say, it's an aha moment, right? You're like, oh my God, aha.
But then when he said this, I just hit Google. I was Googling. I was like, who's speaking about it? Who's speaking? No one. No one was making this connection. No one was even questioning that statement, right? And the imagery that he displays is quite revealing as well, if you combine it with that statement. So Craig's an interesting one because he speaks in multiple dimensions. It's holographic, his information. It's not 2D. What he says,
correct.
There's more to it. What he shows, there's definitely more to that. You have to kind of piece things.
Well, that's purposeful on his part.
I do it as well. This is how I can detect it.
We have this conversation between between the difference between me and him as public speakers and communicators, because I have people have noticed that I have been helping him since I've been working with him on his own presentations and clarity of communication. But at the end of the day, you have to learn to let Craig be Craig, right? You don't want to change someone. And one of his methods is, whereas I can be more literal and explanatory and walk you down exactly how to understand what I'm saying, he will walk you to a point, but then he wants you to figure it out on your own, because in his belief, you will learn it better. You will reinforce it in your own mind better if you figure it out yourself.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I do that a lot with my team, much to their challenge and detriment, which is why Will's laughing right now. But this is how I was managed to pick up certain breadcrumbs and run with it.
I noticed you've done that. You've been following the crumbs Craig has left at various places.
And he does it brilliantly. And that's the thing about him. And this is why I've never been of a similar mind to anybody else when they speak ill of Craig's character, because for someone to learn what he has learned and be willing to teach it, he is willing to teach it. He drops consistent knowledge on a daily basis. He's not selfish.
Correct.
He is not selfish at all. He wants people to look into this stuff and to contribute. I think that's where people misunderstand him. If you contribute, Craig's incredibly respectful and he's a really nice guy. If you contribute, right? But if you attack and you're not even willing to do the bloody research before you're attacking as well, rightly so, you're going to get a negative reaction. I'm very much like that myself, always have been throughout my whole life. So again, that's something that I agree with and I resonate with. But on the subject of Craig, before we get too deep into the subject matter of Craig and where that goes, how did you guys even meet? Because I don't think I've ever seen you speak about that in any detail.
I've actually been asked about it a few times more recently. So in short, so I was an IP and digital tech lawyer in the United States for 21 years. If you can believe it. That's a whole chapter of my life. So I was a partner in these big major corporate law firms. And I had a great career. I had on paper the career I always thought I'd wanted, right? You get to this point where you're a partner of big law firms, you're the head of, different things. I'd been chair and vice chair of different things in, law firms, entertainment media, groups, and the IP litigation groups, and all kinds of things at various law firms. I was chair of the California Bar's IP section. So you climb that ladder as a kid, especially, it's stereotypical, but I was like that Asian, A kid who was checking off steps in the ladder. But by the last few years of my career, I knew I was getting bored, and I wanted to do something else. I wanted to build and create something. So I had started exploring different opportunities. Didn't find quite the right one, and there was a few I got close to taking. Then some clients of mine that I had worked with, as a lawyer in various other businesses in the past, basically ended up finding Craig in Australia. I found out about it because one of the businesses they had at the time was a business that was part of the nChain group until we decided to wind it down, which was the nTrust Encrypt entity in Canada that was a electronic money transfer service and then moved to becoming a Bitcoin wallet exchange for a period of time. That's when they started exploring virtual currencies and Bitcoin. I was their outside lawyer for IP things, so we started looking at and talking about some virtual currency, designs and systems they might implement, and that's how they got interested in the whole world. And they found Craig. I heard about it, and there was,
So someone introduced you to Craig?
Correct.
Did you get any pre-warning to his character, or did you just get thrown in?
Oh yeah, yes. So I didn't. I found about this whole effort. I worked with them sort of behind the scenes to help on certain things. Craig was, he moved with his family from Australia to London. The nChain business was set up to sort of more professionalize the research and work efforts he had been, undergoing in Australia. And I got asked one day after, just through conversations to take on a role because I think they knew, you can have really close relationships with clients, and they knew I was looking to explore something else. And I wasn't the obvious person to bring on board because I'm in the United States. I didn't want to move to London. but for various reasons, the team, they thought we need somebody like you,
Yeah.
right? And I even said, I knew about Bitcoin and virtual currency, but I wasn't like the Bitcoin, the Bitcoin, complete enthusiast. And so I didn't necessarily think I was the obvious person to do this. And one of the things, you find out initially when you're going to do this is, okay, we're going to be working with Craig as the chief scientist, who's sort of the scientific and technical visionary. He can be a challenge, right? And then you go do some research and you read some news articles. And you have to understand, I came from like the blue chip corporate law world where my clients are like the big Fortune 500 companies. I did work for like Microsoft and Amazon and the Motion Picture Association of America and the major movie studios and TV networks. Like, I have like a very blue chip corporate life. And even though in some ways I'm unorthodox and live a bit outside of the box, given my background, I'm very good at working within systems. Yeah. And so the idea of leaving to go, in fact, I remember the day I went home at night to tell Neil, my partner, that I had this opportunity, which you would do to your wife or spouse, right? You say, here's an opportunity, you have to talk about it, right? To leave my very nice, comfy law firm partnership life, my corner office in the big tower, right? To go work with this company being set up out in London with about Bitcoin, with who may or who may not be Satoshi Nakamoto. And people disagree and fight about it online. And there's like these news articles about him.
The BBC thing must have been...
That was after. Yeah.
Oh, was that afterwards?
That was after.
Okay, so this was all heating up. This was quite an interesting moment to join the team.
A lot of the people out there in the community don't realize I was kind of there behind the scenes, and people didn't sort of see me surface until later. So, from at that point, I'm sitting there going, this is not the obvious opportunity for me to go do.
Especially with a law background, being a lawyer, right? So I guess...
lawyers are inherently conservative. They're risk averse, right? They are risk averse. They're not the biggest risk takers.
In this scenario, maybe that held you in good stead because lawyers, researchers, right? Really, really good attention to detail.
Yes.
Right? So what gave you the comfort? What gave you the comfort to take that leap? Because there's a lot of weird news circling around at that time.
Oh, of course.
Around Craig, Bitcoin, Satoshi.
Of course, right, yeah.
You being who you are with your background.
Right.
So
and because also I knew that going into this, a lot of my role was going to be about helping things externally, figuring out the value of the IP and technology was being created by nChain, figuring out because originally I was brought on to help commercialize and figure out the business plan for the IP portfolio. I was an IP and tech lawyer. I had a lot of relationships with major businesses around the world, right? The technology and companies that might be natural users of nChain's business. And I think there was a recognition that we needed someone that was good at communicating it all.
So it was a bit of a soft onboarding. So you came on board like IP, tech.
Yeah, right. And then I think it was you in control of managing his PR image at one point as well? Control is a very strong word there, Michael.
Probably terrible word.
Yeah, let's say it. No,
in relation to Craig?
No, at a certain point, particularly once the company emerged publicly, because it was operating privately for a while, sort of behind the scenes. And when we emerged a little bit more public, which is what led, for example, to the invitation for Craig to speak at the famed Arnhem, Future of Bitcoin conference in July of 2000, I think.
So he grabbed the mic of Matonis, right?
Yes. So at that point, I was also tasked, in addition to the other work I was doing, with helping Craig with those things, right? Which is, all right, he's going to go speak. Someone needs to help him. You used to be the competitive, public speaker debater. I was like a national championship, speaker. When I was younger, right? And so they're like, okay, you help him. And so that's kind of what started our journey together. But at some point before that, obviously in the process, I met him, and I met him first here in London. I had started working kind of sort of behind the scenes with the evolution of what became the nChain company, and then came to London one time. Met him in the nChain office, and then we went out to dinner with who's now our board chairman, just the three of us, because it was important for us to get to know each other and spend some time together. But yeah, I knew before I took the opportunity that Craig had a personality that, shall we say, divided people's opinions, right? And
what then gave you the confidence and therefore commitment to deal with that and put up with that? And because there's something else about this individual that also inspired you. So what was that conversation? What was that conversation where that penny first really dropped for you? Where even you can be part of something, but still have a little niggle in the back of your mind, right? Because the research will lead you somewhere.
Yeah, of course.
But sometimes it takes a while for your emotions and your belief to catch up to the research it is that you've done, right? So when was that penny drop moment? He's like, this guy really was the inventor. He was there at the beginning.
That happened for me later. I had to make a decision going in. First of all, was this something that I was interested in doing? If you are a law firm partner in these professional services industries, you spend your career building up a reputation, a client base, a book of business, right? That is your bread and butter. That's what pays you, right? And with the corporate law world, you need to develop a sterling reputation for the biggest companies of the world to say, hey, I want to hire that guy in his law firm to handle my multi-million-dollar lawsuit, to handle my big tech transaction, whatever it is. And so I knew that doing if I took the leap of faith to sort of join nChain, I was being asked to some extent to put my personal reputation on the line eventually, not necessarily right away, eventually for the company. So that's, it doesn't give you positive, it makes you think. So there was a couple of factors in play. One, I had been in law for a long time. And at some point, if you have to be honest with yourself, and this is the hardest thing, I've seen people struggle with career decisions. Sometimes so many of my lawyer friends are still lawyers because they feel stuck in it. They get in, they make a certain level of money, they have kids and a mortgage and have to pay for private school tuition, and they would rather do something else, but they can't find another job or career path which will pay them as much as we make as law firm partners. And therefore, it's not horrible, but they're just
locked in.
Right, for a while at least. And I felt like that for a while. Then I realized, well, wait a minute, I'm not locked in, right? I don't have that, that hanging me down. And I was just at a point in my life where I realized, as much as people look at me sometimes and go, wow, you're so bold, right? Which sometimes people say, I look at some of my life choices in the past, and if I'm honest, I didn't take leaps of faith more when I was younger than I could have. And I was just at this moment of life where I felt it was time. I had the fortune of having finished law school really early. So I had a full legal career, 21 years, that's a long time. But I was still young enough to kind of take another leap to do something else, right? So, I was, in my early 40s when I decided to leave nChain. And so part of me, it was just saying to myself, Jimmy, it's time. Take a leap of faith, even if it doesn't feel fully comfortable. Secondly, my partner, Neil, we're very different in personalities. He's kind of, he's got the bigger, bolder personality. He calls me the boring one sometimes. I'm like, I'm not boring. And Neil, if you see this, don't call me boring anymore. And I remember coming home to him, explaining this opportunity tonight, and I said, okay. And I got to the part where I was like, and there's this controversy about whether this Craig guy is or isn't Satoshi Nakamoto, the secret, long, unknown creator of Bitcoin. And I was supposed to go work with him and build this business and do something with it, right? And it's a little weird, right? Come on, that'd be a little weird, right? And especially if you weren't really into Bitcoin in the beginning, right? And, and tying yourself to someone controversial can be a bit of a risk. And when he looked at me, he said, that sounds hot. You should do it.
No, well done, mate. That's a good assessment.
Right? Yeah. He's like, that sounds hot. You should do it. And then I had to decide, is this what I wanted to work with? And I look back to earlier in my career, because I started as a lawyer at the very beginning of the internet boom. So I got out of law school in 1995. So this is the beginning of the internet boom. Internet boom is happening. There were opportunities. I had to go work at .com companies, right? To go work in internet. I stayed in law, so I represented those companies, but I didn't.
Not pets.com, by any chance.
What?
Not pets.com.
No, I did not. But I didn't. I had opportunities to go work in the industry as opposed to be a service provider for the industry. And by the end of my law career, I got tired of just being the person who helped other companies build what they were creating or their mission. And I wanted to do it myself. And it just seemed to me this crazy opportunity to be at what I honestly believe is the next big technology leap of our lifetime that will have the impact on the world like the internet did.
Yeah.
Right? This is there have been other great technologies in between, but this, in my mind, is the next thing will have the magnitude of what the internet did to
Completely
our lives. And I didn't take that opportunity that I had when I was 25, right? And I'm staring this in the face and said, what are you afraid of? And that was the biggest personal journey for me. And to having to say to myself, should I do this no matter how it turns out? And it was my chance to get over my own internal reservations, being risk averse about certain things, and internal fears about how is it going to turn out. And in fact, the client that had sort of brought me into the mix said something to me very powerful about a year earlier. It was before this all sort of came up. And he said to me at this dinner, we were talking about other things I could do, and he said, well, why don't you go do them? And he said to me, oh, I figured it out. You're like the A+ student. You only like to do things that you know you can get an A in. You need to one day do something where you don't know that you're going to get the A in it. And it's okay that you don't.
Brilliant advice.
And that it's okay that you don't. And I remember, I was like, what are you talking about? And then I went home, I went, oh my God, that like hit me deep, right? I went, oh my God, maybe he's right. Never thought of myself that way. And I sort of had to throw myself into this world where I knew something about it, but I didn't come from a technical or development background,
The difference
right?
is this time you was willing to fail forward if you did fail.
Yeah,
you set your
right.
mind to
And
it.
so I made the decision actually without even meeting Craig. Because for me, I had to make the decision, even though I knew I would have to work with him a lot, that it was about what the opportunity and the mission was in general and what it would be for me, rather than about a personality. Because I also had to say to myself, does it matter to me whether I believe he's Satoshi Nakamoto or not? Yeah. Because if I was making my decision based upon that, I could be setting myself up entirely for huge disappointment.
So that leads you up to how you made your decision and how you joined nChain and the distortion of making that decision. So you're now at nChain, in the deep end, completely out of your comfort zone, right?
Yes, especially in the beginning, yes.
And you're working for the intellectual within the space. When did you yourself suppress the rumors and the hearsay and move away from outer knowledge, so what other people are saying, and then consulting that own inner voice within yourself? When did you decide within yourself, whether it be, I'm completely convinced this person is Satoshi, or this person is so bloody good and so intelligent and backs up what he says and presents me with information that really does back up what he says, and I have absolute, not blind belief, I've validated and I have confidence in this person's vision? When was that moment for you?
It's a very good question. I don't know that there was one epiphany moment, but the thing I decided to myself is, what did I want to go help create? What do I want to go help build? And if it was a belief in Bitcoin as the next major technology leap of our lifetime, and the blockchain that underpins it being used for technology advancements, and in ways that can really change the world and people's lives, right? All of that intertwined for me because I wanted something interesting, intellectual, and technology oriented, but as we talked about at the beginning, that had a human touch, right? It's how I always want to think, well, what am I going to feel about this? How am I going to care about this? And for me, doing my research about Craig, before I even got to nChain, it was clear to me that, as crazy as people think he is sometimes, he's consistent about what he wants, right? Which is Bitcoin. To be the world-changing technology, to be used by billions of people. And he doesn't like, as we're all clearly seeing, when people want to bastardize or change Bitcoin. then you have to ask yourself, well, why does he want Bitcoin so much, right? People have tried to create other forms of electronic cash. Now they're creating all kinds of cryptocurrency. Why is he so singularly focused on this? And then, of course, that naturally brings up the is he or isn't he Satoshi question. But I made a decision a long time ago that I was going to proceed based upon what I saw he believed in, what he did, and what he worked on. And that has been consistently, and it was much more clear once I got working with nChain, seeing things behind the scenes, that is his unilateral, 100% laser-focused goal. It creates, and did create in the past, conflict within the company when people wanted to work on directions for things that were not Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
And I could see it, right? I would have to sometimes have to be the one resolving, the conflict or dealing with it. And it's very clear in terms of the strategy and things we talk about. And that I personally had to make a decision that was more important than anything to me, because and I've had this conversation with Craig, there's nothing he could ever do that will definitively prove to the world that he is Satoshi Nakamoto, even if he is, right? I mean, I certainly have my feelings about it, but everyone wants him, sign with cryptographic keys and blah, blah, blah. And whether he does or not, there's always going to be contingents of people say, I don't believe. And there's no way to definitively prove it. And
also, there's not a huge amount of upside for Craig.
Correct.
There
There's
really
not.
isn't.
There's not. That's what people don't understand. There is no upside. And so for me, I had to think about what I wanted to be involved in building and creating and why I came to this, right? And so that has been more important than anything. I will say that I remember when I started having what I would call moments of, I don't call them breakthrough. We never had a challenged relationship, Craig and I. We always started working together. I thought we worked together well early. But when you go from the just working together relationship to
being boys. That's a term we use in London when you're really close.
Yeah. For me, and I think this is important to understand about Craig, being someone he trusted.
Being boys. Yeah.
But for him, trust is very important, right? Which is ironic because we're talking about a trustless system like Bitcoin, but that he can trust certain people because he doesn't trust many people. I remember those moments when I could start feeling that he was trusting my judgment or listening to me, that, and he also respected me because he doesn't like to work with people he doesn't respect, right? Where he doesn't feel like you've done your homework, right? Like if you come to him and you haven't thought about it or done your homework, and that doesn't sit well with him. And then feeling like he believes and I believe we're on the same journey together, right? And I think he does honestly believe that. And then when I started just seeing him as a human being, I think that was the big epiphany for me. Is at first he was Craig, this personality, this scientist, this guy who would go in the office and would, as some people say in the Twitter sphere, technobabble, right? Yeah. And I was like, I don't understand it. And, and at some point I had to get over, not the fear, but just to, have the fortitude to say, Craig, I need you to explain this to me, right? For example, I remember one time when he was all up in arms about the introduction of SegWit, right, into BTC. And we're talking about it and its impact, what to do with it. And I understood it, in theory, but not probably as well as I needed to at that moment. And so I just called him up one time. I was in LA, he was in London. I said, Craig, okay, I need you to just walk me through this. Here's what I understand of it, right? Why is this bad? Why is this gonna be bad for Bitcoin? And we had this conversation about it. And it was one of those moments where I think I understood him better. He understood where I was coming from better and understood that I was trying to help, right? And then those moments are important. But I think for me, the biggest moment with Craig is the moments I first started realizing he was just a human being.
Yeah.
And that has a lot to do with how he is with his family.
Okay.
It was my first time seeing him, for example, with his wife or his kids. He's a very different person, and for me, as we talked about at the very beginning, keeps going back to the same thing. That human touch is very important for me.
So it's an important reminder. It really is an important reminder because
he's not an automaton. He's not a robot. He's not some, evil thing that's machinating up here, whatever. At the end of the day, he's a human being. He has thoughts, he has feelings. And that doesn't mean I agree with everything he does. Trust me, we've had moments of conflict ourselves. I think what I find funny on the Twitter sphere is when people think that he's got like this army of people just working at nChain, doing whatever he says, including me, right? And obviously he sets a lot of our vision, technically, and where we're supposed to be going. But I can assure you there are many times where I'm like, no, Craig, we're not doing that. No, Craig, that's no.
And all due respect, I mean, the way that we run things here with Bitstocks, we're exactly the same as well, because myself, I have a very strong character. I have a very clear vision as well. I know how to fulfill my visions, and I have always done it irrespective of who's on board or who isn't. Because no one will define what my path is and the willingness to fulfill that path. But you have people who join you on missions, and you have people who join you on your vision. But in order for people to be around me, I have to respect them.
Correct.
Right. And to respect someone, you also have to, that person, for me at least, has to have strength, their own inner strength. I'm not looking for a bunch of individuals around me to wrap me up in cotton wool.
Right.
Absolutely not. I want to surround myself with individuals who intellectually challenge me. And I never want what I say to be taken as gospel. I want it to be criticized as long as you're coming from the position of being enlightened. Right?
Correct.
If you're trying to debunk without doing the homework, that's a different scenario.
And that's what people should know about Craig. He actually values having people around him who make him better, right? Because he knows he can't do everything. And I guess to wrap up kind of my thoughts on this whole subject of, I can say that having now worked with him behind the scenes very intensely through, some, big things, I don't think it matters whether I believe he's Satoshi Nakamoto or not. But I can say I don't know of anyone else that has the level of insight and understanding of Bitcoin and its potential, what its original design and protocol can do.
It's completely unrivaled. His perspective, his understanding of Bitcoin is completely unrivaled. And if there's anyone watching this who believes that they know someone who knows Bitcoin better and can prove and validate that, also go through the mathematics in the same similar fashion, then I will listen to you.
Of course.
And I'm sure Jimmy would too. And it really is. I'm sure Craig would too.
Right.
It's as simple as that.
And on top of that, he's been involved with Bitcoin since, its beginning
Pre-Genesis.
in one way or another. And you can add that up and draw whatever conclusions you feel comfortable drawing.
So, moving away from the subject of Craig.
Sure. Yeah.
Op returns.
Yes.
There's been some exciting things that's been happening with SV. I've noticed the thing that really gets me excited about Bitcoin, right? And obviously by Bitcoin, I'm talking about SV, is it feels like Bitcoin again. It really, really does. I've been in this space.
Feels exciting now, doesn't it?
It does, because I remember back in 2014, 2015, even early 2016, there was just crazy projects going on. There were cool projects
people were building
on.
things.
They were building things. They weren't limited by fees. They were limited by their imagination.
Correct.
And that has disappeared from Bitcoin.
Yes.
It completely disappeared, right? And that imagination overflowed elsewhere into all of these different projects, right?
It spawned the other.
It really did.
Right.
But with SV, it's back. It really is
kind of
back.
crazy, isn't it?
So
in a good way, crazy in a good way. It's I must say, even I am very pleasantly surprised at how quickly it's come.
Yeah. So on the op returns,
yes,
right. So with Bitcoin, if I'm not mistaken, we went from 40 to 80 bytes.
Correct.
Cash was 220.
220, yes.
And then with SV now, we have 100 kilobytes, not bytes. We have 100
Correct.
kilobytes.
Currently as settings by certain miners.
Okay.
Right.
What are these to be used for? So as the audience,
what can it be used for?
Well,
gosh, so many things. I mean, since Steve Shatters, figured out, how he was going to lift that data size limit
without requiring consensus as well.
Correct.
Right?
And I think he and the SV node team's plan is to eventually, lift it entirely through a consensus protocol change. But what can you do with it? So obviously you can use the field to embed any type of data and metadata. And with a larger size, what we're seeing is all these wonderful, creative, some are experiments and some may live long as projects. Let's be honest about that. You know, not all these things are going to turn into big businesses, but it's so cool to see. So we've seen
You've got,
music files, video files. You know, Andrew Nguyen, who's this developer who's experimented with a whole bunch of stuff. He did a music file. He did, I think, a chess game, a digital chess game, a digital clock.
Yeah.
Someone has created Bitcoin files.
Yeah, there's BitcoinFiles.org,
which is like Dropbox.
Yeah, kind of Dropbox for
right. Unwriter, mysterious, you know, developer, whoever you are. Thank you, Unwriter. Has been just on a rampage and roll. He just the other day released Bitstagram, right? Like Instagram on Bitcoin, where you can pay a tiny bit of BitcoinSV to upload a picture from your phone or from, you know, preloaded, and add filters, because you know, we all love filters, to the BitcoinSV blockchain. And someone's he's added tipping to that, so you can tip people's pictures. Those are examples. And I've heard of some other things I can't talk about yet that are like really even bigger and mind-blowing, but it's, as I've been talking about, the ability to now use Bitcoin SV as a data carrier network, right? Combined with its micropayment transaction capabilities, which combine the ability to store and transmit data natively with a financial transaction. So those are some of the great things we've been seeing.
This also applies a new metric for people to evaluate blockchains.
Yes, and there's new, for example, what's on chain? Have you checked out that Block Explorer? They have added, and I think some other block explorers have added, ability to track opportune fields, right? The size of data in them, the type of file that's in the data. So it is a new metric, right? I know Moneybutton has gotten a lot of increased activity because of the opportune data size limit increasing. And, you know, and that's really helpful for a business like that, because people are using Moneybutton to pay to add things to the Bitcoin SV blockchain, and they've seen an increase in usage. We've also seen, particularly over the last, you know, week in particular, increase in the average block size, right? You're seeing 1-2 megabyte blocks on a not, you know, I don't want to say all the time, but on a fairly regular basis, which in the scheme of things is still really small, right? But I think as more and more people discover this capability, find uses for it, you know, I guess there's somebody who's created something where I think where you can like, record or index, you know, like news, right? Or websites, I think, like, you know, web pages, right? Kind of like, you know, where, I forgot the name, it's, you know, the web archives, but so you can permanently record what a web page looked like at a moment in time, right? That's an interesting service someone could provide one day.
That's a really interesting service because
web pages change, right?
Yeah, they change. They can change information after people thinks it says one thing, and then afterwards it says something else.
As a former lawyer, I can tell you the value of that, right? Because when I was a lawyer, we were litigating cases. Especially I was handling digital and IP technology cases. A lot of things we looked at were on websites, and you would look at a website, and I would always tell the team, if it said something that was, you know, good evidence or beneficial for us, we need to screen capture it, right? We need to print it out, and then you would have to authenticate it. Someone would have to sign a declaration saying, "Hi, I'm Jimmy Nguyen, and I visited this website at this URL on this page at this time, and here's the printout, and I saved it, so in case it was challenged later, or someone said, no, that's not what it was," there you would get into this evidence battle. But if you didn't do that at the time, you had to want to know, what did that web page look like 4 months ago? There was no way really to do that. The Wayback Machine is not consistent, right? And in fact, there's court cases finding that Wayback Machine printouts are not necessarily reliable evidence, right? And so
if you got immutable on the blockchain,
that's a very powerful and interesting use case for the greater opportune data size limit. So someone could start a service making money by archiving permanently every X minutes, whatever, every day pages of websites.
So speaking about all of these different use cases and different ways of putting information on the blockchain, this naturally supports the argument of bigger blocks. And because you can look at the blockchain right now in SV's case and say, okay, we're getting an uptick, we're getting 2 megabyte blocks, but right now we know the headroom is 128 megabytes for a block. So your average individual will look at it and be like, well, you're nowhere even close to 128 megabytes. Why are you guys even speaking about half a gigabyte blocks this year? Like, where's the logic behind it? And it's scenarios like this that people need to look into as to how the blockchain is to be utilized. And one of the analogies that I have made, I think I brought it up on the Hash War podcast that we done. And for the most part, people evaluate what they can see.
Correct.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So an example that I used is we breathe in oxygen, right? And we know that you've got lungs in your body, your lungs take in the oxygen, and that is how you breathe. But there's also something that you don't see is that your body emits C2O, CO2, and trees take in CO2 and emit oxygen. So 50% of your lungs are technically outside of your body. That's what you can't see. But with that logic, it makes perfect sense that you're not going to run out of here and start chopping down trees, right? It just makes complete logical sense. In Bitcoin's case and with Bitcoin, I think the argument with developers and how they look at it is they only analyze the body. Right?
Yes.
They're only looking at the body. What they don't think about is what we are not seeing, how another business, how another individual or a collective of individuals are looking at this technology about what future use cases this could potentially
Seeing
have.
the unseen.
Seeing the unseen.
Yeah. Right.
And I don't think that should be on any one individual to try and warp shape our global co-collective state of consciousness. How are you going to work out what the world wants?
Yeah, and the great thing that the opportune data size limit lifting has revealed is the explosion of creativity that even we could not have predicted.
Exactly.
Right? If you just give people the capability, had you kept that data size limit small, no one would be thinking about an Instagram on chain, on Bitcoin, right? And how that could be monetized or lead to, fascinating new use cases. Our mission, and Craig's mission in particular, is to just create the base layer, the protocol, the plumbing infrastructure to enable a whole new world of uses, which he's always seen. It's possible. In fact, we gave a speech we both spoke in Japan at the Japan Blockchain Conference, recently. And I spoke before him. I talked about the opportune data size limit. And he gets up afterwards like, Jimmy's all excited about the opportune data size limit. And that's just like, nothing, right? Like to him, that's just the tiny tip of the iceberg. You and I are all excited about it. Like literally, if you talk to him, he's just like, that's, one
of the prerequisites.
Right. That's just that's nice. Yeah. And because it's capable of even so much more. But the more you can enable that, the greater it is. Like, so for example, I think it's Keyport that's already, or maybe someone else who's already done sort of the first live streaming video. And I think it's done through the opportune field, which I hadn't really even thought about that. Yeah. Even that's just a whole other, level. And so the lesson is, if you look at the journey of Bitcoin, its capabilities have been artificially restricted for so much of the past 10 years of its history. And that is why Craig has been so adamant about fighting and taking a stand to preserve the original Bitcoin protocol and design. It's why we fought last year against the ABC camp to preserve through Bitcoin Cash and now through BitcoinSV the original design, because it wasn't because we cared that much about the ticker symbol or what you call it. It's like we needed that capability and we needed it unleashed. Some of the things restored, having this unleashed, and having a Bitcoin with really no limits. And that's what he's cared about. It's what he's always cared about. It's what I've known and heard since I've been working with him behind the scenes. That may not be obvious to everyone out there. Hopefully it is by now, as people are seeing. I think the difference now, and what's so exciting, is that in the past, Craig would talk about these things and people kind of go, right? They wouldn't quite get it. But now that it's possible and experiments and projects are happening on BitcoinSV that demonstrate it live and people can use it, it's opening people's minds and going, oh, wow.
There's been a massive shift as to how people view anything that's coming out of this camp. And by this camp, I'm talking about the global community who does support SV,
right.
And the pure version of Bitcoin for the right reasons. There has been definitely a shift as to how people are digesting Craig since this moment. Because after removing, I saw this whole hash war as an opportunity to remove the distortions, right? I was like, just this whole infighting needs to stop, right? It's not going to stop anytime soon, right? If people think that their way is the right way of going about it, you know what? Sometimes it's just not worth the argument of trying to convince them. Let them go fulfill their own ideals, and eventually they'll hit their technical limitations, right? But what I found beautiful and really refreshing and reassuring and very invigorating and exciting is the fact that we pushed out the noise and the distortions from this project now.
And the irony is there were people on the other side of this battle that fought the battle to push out Craig.
Yeah.
That's the irony of it all, right? And a perfect example of the benefit of that is that, you know, the Bitcoin Association hosted recently, I know, you know, your company couldn't make it to this one, but a first wallet workshop of key wallet representatives in the Bitcoin SV ecosystem here in London. Steve Shatters and, you know, are from nChain helped lead it. And I wasn't able to make it, but the feedback that I heard was Steve told me he was a little hesitant going into the wallet workshop because the past times he's tried to have workshops in Bitcoin, it always was less productive than you would like because there was this
opposing ideals.
Right. And everyone wondering you have an agenda, so that's why you want that, right? And questioning everything of that anyone else would suggest and propose, and it being a little, not antagonistic, but uncomfortable, right? And he said, in his mind, that was probably the single most productive week he's ever had in Bitcoin. Shockingly so, because he said, we got these people in a room together, and much to everyone's surprise, we were all been thinking about the same things. We might have had, he said, you know, people having different views of how you might implement something in a wallet or a change you might make here or there. But in terms of the big goals of what everyone was trying to accomplish, they were all the same. And it was so refreshing to be in a room where there wasn't fighting.
So give us a quick rundown. What is the Bitcoin Association?
So
quick rundown.
Yeah, so basically we wanted to create the leading industry business group for Bitcoin businesses, right? As this ecosystem is developing to gather exchanges, wallets, merchants, businesses that want to develop enterprise applications on Bitcoin, application developers, miners, and anyone else. Because, you know, Bitcoin doesn't really have a business industry association. And now it's focused on building BitcoinSV. To join the association, you don't have to only exclusively support BitcoinSV. We welcome, you know, anyone who's interested in participating in the BitcoinSV ecosystem. But now that it is its own ecosystem, you know, I'm spending a lot more of my time there because, you know, I think there's this recognition that we need to build everything that's necessary for the growth of BSV. Infrastructure, industry relationships. I'm doing more and more conversations with government agencies and things, reviewing even legislation and providing comment to encourage responsible enactment of cryptocurrency and digital asset legislation.
How do you see the legal climate and regulatory climate forming over the next couple of years?
Well, first, I expect continued crackdown on ICOs and security tokens that are unregistered. You'll see additional prosecution enforcement against past ICOs as sending a signal. Right?
Just on that point, actually, because we had our own exposure to the ICO racket with our lawyers. So we was going to do an ICO back in 2016. We was started putting together the groundworks of doing an ICO. And so I was looking into it, going to different lawyers' meetings. I was trying to work out who I wanted my law firm to be. Ended up with Simmons & Simmons in London. Mostly due to the fact that we both at the same time came to the determination that this is bullshit. This ICO stuff is bullshit. And the reason why I have such an amazing relationship with Simmons now, and we do quite a lot of good things together. I was even speaking at the Houses of Parliament from an invitation from Simmons as well, is because it's just basic questions. That's really, 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 really basic questions. And what I was basically getting as a gist from other law firms, I'm not going to name any names, but it was, guys, this as a utility token, we all know what it is, right? But the fact that I had one of my requirements that could not be undone was I have to be responsible of giving value back to my investors, right? I don't want to just throw them on the secondary market and say good luck, right? There needs to be more control and ownership over this whole process. They were literally advising me, not Simmons, these other law firms, they were basically advising me to not do that because that will actually get me in more legal hot water. Just guise this as a utility token, and basically whatever happens to your investors happens to your investors.
I see.
And then I was getting offers left, right, and center, almost like on a bi-weekly basis of people offering me money to appear on their ICO, right, as an advisor. So to me, I just saw this as...
I get them too. I'm like, yeah, no.
Cowboys have run rife, and then very soon, we're going to see a bunch of cowboys walking around in gold boots. And that's exactly what happened.
And people don't take that seriously when some of us start saying this is what's going to happen, because they're, everyone wants to, rationalize in their head. Well, that's not a security because it's not stock, right? It's not equity in a company, so it can't be. But it's, so I expect to see more increased, enforcement actions. But in terms of the legislative landscape, my feeling is that most governments and government agencies are interested in. I don't think this is a situation for most countries where they're going to shut down cryptocurrency and blockchain technology, right? I think most governments are realistic enough to look at it and go, you know what, this is here. The genie is out of the bottle.
Yeah.
We cannot put the genie back in the bottle. Not only that, this is an opportunity for business and economic growth, right? Especially for countries that are more developing, they look at it as an opportunity to leapfrog, right? They're behind in certain areas economically. This is a way to easily encourage technology development that could help them catch up in other areas. And so the legislation I've been seeing, and I've reviewed several countries, pieces of legislation for virtual currency businesses or digital asset businesses, have similar themes. They want businesses that conduct what's considered a virtual currency or digital asset business to get a license. Not that much different than money transmitter or securities, regulation licenses. They want to impose certain due diligence requirements, right? Particularly if you're holding, funds in custody of consumers. Where there's differences and where I've been making recommendations is to draw differences and distinctions between different types of digital assets. They're not all the same. Right? I think that's important for legislators. And it's also important for businesses that are operating in the space to have more clarity about whether what they're dealing with is considered an alternative to money, or it's a asset that represents something else. So I've been making those kinds of recommendations. I've also been encouraging, and I hope people see the benefit of this, that countries, when they do enact legislation that says, fine, we will license and regulate a digital asset or virtual currency business, that they at the same time enact either new or corresponding legislation which makes it clear that those businesses can get bank accounts in that country. Because the banks need to know that. Otherwise, it's an excuse for banks to deny bank accounts. You can't operate. I mean, you could, but it's so much more difficult, as I'm sure you know. And it legitimizes the businesses. And my point is, if you're going to say it's lawful in this country to operate a digital asset or virtual currency business, and I'm going to give you a license in my country to do so, it should also be very clearly legal that that company should get a bank account.
Because this has been an issue for years. It went from Isle of Man 2015 as the crypto place to be, Gibraltar crypto place to be, Malta crypto place to be. And the banks are never on the same page.
Correct.
They're never on the same page. So that is something that we've had to learn the hard way.
Yeah, and an example I gave recently, it's funny, Wyoming of all states in the United States is on this wave of enacting cryptocurrency and blockchain related legislation. They're trying to send the signal, come to Wyoming, form your businesses here. But I actually used one of their bills that was passed as an example because it didn't tell banks you have to, you can't force banks to give banking to cryptocurrency businesses, but it creates a separate class of bank that is designed to be focused on cryptocurrency and blockchain businesses. So, you can be a bank in more than one class. And I thought that was interesting. I think that was an interesting approach. I don't know that you have to have a separate class.
Just play devil's advocate on this a bit as well, is I don't think we can completely put the blame on banks and all the things that people conjure up in their mind towards banks as to why a bank isn't on board in the cryptocurrency business.
Correct, because there's risk to them.
We really haven't done ourselves favors as well.
Correct.
With how we as a community have conducted ourselves. There's a variety of different exchanges you could go to without
Look at the
AML,
Quadriga
KYC.
mess, right? That's a perfect example of why a bank's like, I don't want to touch this. And so, no, I understand. I think a big difference, as you've seen in our public, commentary between nChain and Craig and me and a lot of the other forces in the Bitcoin world is we're not anti-institution. We're not anti-bank. Yeah, we don't think all banks and governments are bad or evil. In fact, they're necessary. Craig says this a lot. I will say it too. Bitcoin is not here to end banks. I find it funny when people are like, kill the banks, Bitcoin's here. I think banks have actually a very important and vital role in a Bitcoin ecosystem, right? It's why I'm so impressed with what you're doing with Gravity, right? Creating like a comprehensive online banking solution for Bitcoin. Banks have a role. Bitcoin will not replace banks. Let's stop acting that way.
100%.
It may change and should change the role of banks in certain services and certain aspects of a Bitcoin ecosystem. But, and I actually would encourage banks when I talk to them to find ways they could operate in the Bitcoin ecosystem. What I say to them is, in a world that's happening now, do you want to be Blockbuster Video or do you want to be Netflix?
Yeah, absolutely.
You can absolutely be Netflix and actually have an even more successful line of business that may be different than your original business model.
Without all the overheads, the huge overheads of Blockbusters.
Correct. Right.
Now,
and so, so we're not anti-bank. We don't think all banks are evil, and it's not banks' fault that they have concerns about banking for cryptocurrency businesses. With that said, I would encourage banks to be far more open to it. There are fully legitimate cryptocurrency and blockchain businesses. And what can help that is if governments send the signal that we are okay with banks, banking, under the right circumstances, crypto businesses.
So one area I definitely want to cover, and we can start wrapping things up, is the subject of nChain and patents.
Yes.
Right. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Yep.
I completely understand them. I understand why the patents are there. I think they're valuable, and I'm glad they're there as well. I'm really actually glad that they're there. But to play devil's advocate for the next couple of minutes, what is the argument to be afforded to the wider cryptocurrency community as to why these patents are a good thing and why they were necessary, but then you have the conundrum, I guess, of not revealing all of your strategy?
Sure,
right?
Of course. Yeah.
So what is the best, approach to alleviate the concerns around patents?
First of all, I want to say, especially to the crypto community watching here, that we can't ignore that the patent system exists in this world. It does, right? We live, and I say this in a lot of my speeches, we're building BitcoinSV to live in a real world with real laws. And that means taking advantage of laws that exist that can protect your work and your assets. And so the fact that the patents are there gives us an opportunity to take advantage of patent law. I want to make clear, and this is a huge misconception, because I understand that the cryptocurrency world comes from a very open source development community where their preference is putting things out for free common usage that everyone can use and build upon. I fully understand that, fully respect that, and there are things nChain is doing that is open source, if not entirely, at least for BitcoinSV. The big thing people need to understand is I don't think they understand what the patents cover, right? Every time someone complains to me or says something negative about nChain patent, I said, have you actually read any of them? Part of the problem is patents are difficult. I used to be an IP lawyer. They are much narrower than people realize, right? And so I think people criticize them without even understanding them or reading them. And as you would say, that's just, don't criticize something unless you actually have read and understood them. What people need to know is the patents do not cover the base Bitcoin protocol. you can't do that anyways. Bitcoin's been out there for 10 years, right? It's code, it's design, it's protocol, and that is not Craig nor nChain's intent. How he, describes things internally is he's always had in his mind different techniques and inventions of things you can do on the Bitcoin blockchain, but that can be applied to any of these so-called other blockchain projects. And they're kind of like Lego bricks, right? And he comes up with techniques to solve problems that other people haven't figured out how to do. There's value in that. And as a company, we're a private business. We have to generate enterprise value. You'll appreciate that. It's why we're different than the other Bitcoin development, node software projects that aren't. And so one way to generate enterprise value is through IP. We're not trying to create IP and get IP assets that block people from using Bitcoin, right? That is not our intent. With that said, if we create things that make BitcoinSV in particular more usable, we want people to do it on BitcoinSV. In Craig's view, there should only be one blockchain, just like there's one global public internet upon which we all
Which, by the way, has a plethora of patents applied to.
Well, that's the other thing. I'm glad you said that. There are so many internet patents in the world. So many. Yet, I know some people complain about them, but no one's sitting around going, oh my God, why are these companies getting internet patents? Just like all these companies are getting blockchain patents. And you see, as you see the reports of blockchain patenting, that many of the largest companies in the world, the banks, IBM, right, et cetera, Microsoft, are getting blockchain patents. No one's complaining that they're getting patents, but because Craig Wright's doing it, all of a sudden it's big bad, Craig Wright. And as he'll say, would you rather, the patenting process is often a race, right? We might not come up with the exact same technique or invention, but they might bleed over to the point where one blocks the other, right? And so sometimes we are in a race, not intentionally, but we need to file things as soon as possible to make sure we claim first priority to it. And if we don't do it, someone else will do it. And I would say to the Bitcoin world, would you rather have us hold patents that cover inventions that we can use on Bitcoin? Or would you rather have, and I'm not disparaging them, IBM or Bank of America?
That's such a strong point, and I want to provide a little bit of clarity to that point as well before people jump to their assumptions and instantly assume that you shouldn't even look at either one of these people or these camps having patents. This goes back to, I guess, agenda.
Yes.
Okay. And
what are we trying to accomplish? What's our mission?
And if you look at agenda, you look at what someone says, and then you look at their actions. Okay. Do their actions match up with what it is that they say? Everyone in the SV camp, CoinGeek, nChain, yourself, Craig, Calvin, you look at actions and you look at what it is that they say, they completely, utterly match up. They proved it, and you guys proved it in the hash war, where you guys, and Craig obviously predominantly, was willing to bleed out for this course.
Correct.
Okay. Put in your money where your mouth is.
Correct. Absolutely.
Mine's software company, patent, R&D.
Yes.
News organization.
Yes. It costs a lot of money and time.
It's a lot of bloody money.
Yes.
And just look at Jimmy's crazy travel schedule.
Yeah.
It's a lot of time and money. So to then say to someone who's putting an insane amount of money into building this technology that we are all going to leverage from, we're all going to benefit from, okay? But laying the foundations. To then turn around and say to this person, you can't protect those foundations.
Why do you have an incentive to spend that much effort? For example, Craig's had a lot of these ideas in his head for a long time, right? But it takes paying a team of researchers and sometimes developers to flesh out how to actually implement some of them, to make the math work, to figure out how it would be implemented technically, right? You have to pay people to do that, right? There's a reason we have a bigger volume of this work than other Bitcoin organizations, because we have committed the resources to invest in it, and which means we have to somehow protect that investment. There are ways which we will use those IP assets to benefit our preferred blockchain, BitcoinSV, right? Where there we can provide royalty-free licenses to use it, or open BitcoinSV license to use it on the Bitcoin blockchain. And it doesn't mean that someone can't come to nChain and say, hey, I would like to use that on Ethereum. And we say, fine, pay us a license fee. That's what any other company in any other industry would have the right to say. Right? I've invented something. I've gotten a patent for it. And by the way, the other thing people need to understand is patents are not easy to get. It's not like you submit some piece of paper and boom, the patent office goes, yes, rubber stamp, you get it. No, it's very rigorous. Our patent lawyers review everything before even deciding to file a patent application to evaluate whether they think it's even patentable.
And how many do you have approved and how many do you have in the works? Ballpark.
The total number that have been filed as we go through our internationalization process and bring them out, I just got the number today. It is around 690.
Wow.
Around the world.
Wow.
So in terms of the number granted, it's much earlier in the process, but that includes just, you file an application, then you file it in other countries and jurisdictions. So we are getting way up there. And so I want people to know the patent offices examine the patent, the claimed invention. They look at prior art history and prior patents granted in that field and will not grant you a patent unless they believe that is something novel, inventive, useful. There's all these requirements and it's not easy. There's some rubber stamp. And sometimes people mistake, reporting. They're like, oh, well, Craig's just trying to patent threshold signatures. They've been there a long time. Duh, we cannot patent something that's been out there for a long time. You have to come up with and create something unique and novel on top of existing.
Then you get a patent.
Inventions.
If it's already been invented, you don't get the patent.
Correct.
Right?
And and it's being examined by people by a patent office who are scientists and lawyers themselves, right?
Yeah.
So this is not an easy process. That's why it's time consuming and expensive. So we're doing it. Other companies are doing it. We are willing to use nChain's IP portfolio for the benefit of BitcoinSV and the original design of Bitcoin to help it grow, right, and be used around the world, and use it as a protective measure, not to saying that you can't do it on another blockchain, because our patents, so people understand, and inventions are blockchain agnostic. And some of them aren't even limited to blockchain. Two of Craig's early key inventions, the deterministic key generation technique and secure split key technique, are just for all forms of digital security. You could use it on your mobile phone, right? People are certainly free, like they are to any IP holder, to come to nChain and say, you know what? I know you only might allow free usage of that on BitcoinSV. I want to use that on my application on EOS.
Yeah.
And you enter into a business negotiation.
Yeah. And one thing I really want people to utilize to navigate their logical compass with this is it goes back to economic incentives.
Yes.
And this is why I think it's one of the most beautiful design choices in Bitcoin.
Because of the economic incentive.
Economic incentives. And people can use this and really cut all the personality and the personal feelings towards a scenario if they just focus on economic incentives. They can get a lot of comfort from economic incentives because you can see and quite easily estimate a ballpark figure as to how much money has been spent by CoinGeek, nChain, and the camps that support SV. It's not difficult to see. Even just putting on the CoinGeek London event, right? That's a lot lot
It is a lot of money. I know what the budget is. It's not insane. Yes,
right. Probably Calvin's party's after that budget, but
Calvin throws a mean party.
He really does. But it takes an incredible amount of resources. So I have a lot of comfort in seeing that money being spent towards one common goal, one sole focus.
Right.
If you then take that thinking and you look at Bitcoin, the BTC camp, and you look at the core camp, you look how they're funded, and you don't take the personalities out of the equation. Just look at the consequences that has happened from a fragmented set of economic incentives. Because it is, you don't really necessarily know whose agenda is really aligned with the project or not, right? Mm-hmm. You don't know who's pulling each other's strings, who's paying who. And the same thing really, I guess.
Whereas we're very open and transparent about it. It's very Bitcoin ethos. Like Bitcoin's about transparency. It's not about anonymity. And I love when people are like, oh, someone's shilling for BitcoinSV or nChain. I'm like, no, if people work for us, people know. It's not like we don't pay anyone to just secretly support us. They're like, we don't have a need to do that, right?
But the internet is always right. Every comment on the internet is always right. They're incredibly factual.
I know. And I'm glad you raised that point, because I want to use this moment to make clear that no matter what people think of Craig or nChain or Calvin or anything we're doing, you're right, they have been totally consistent. Because I see it behind the scenes with our planning, knowing what money is spent where. They've been very consistent on investing into Bitcoin. Obviously, we supported Bitcoin Cash for a while, but then when it became clear to us it was veering in another direction away from the original Bitcoin design, we threw our support behind BitcoinSV. But there is a significant investment by both of those organizations in research and development, right? The IP portfolio, in investment in other ventures, right? Supporting entrepreneurs that are trying to build on this, in mining, right? And in media and education.
Even a £5 million reward for the tokenization, right? That's an incredible amount of money. That's a game-changing amount of money for people who are
That's a life-changing opportunity for that team.
Absolutely.
And you can laugh about it. You can criticize, how things about Craig or Calvin, but they have been very clearly consistent. And it makes my job easier, because when we are looking at what to do, I know if I go to them and say, the ecosystem really needs this right now, and this is why, they'll be there.
Yeah.
And that makes me feel good about what we're doing, and seeing what's happening in the ecosystem now with BitcoinSV and the explosion of projects that are coming out because of the opportune data size limit makes me feel like, all right, we did the right thing. Because, I'll be honest, I had moments as we were getting ready for the hash war where I felt the weight of responsibility of what was going to happen to this ecosystem.
I remember. Yeah.
Because I care, right? And I had to sometimes look at them in the eye and said, all right, we're doing the right thing, right?
You was really disappointed about Roger's stance, because that's something that we discussed when we was in Vapiano's, and you genuinely was disappointed. I think this is the thing that people get from behind a computer screen, that there's some vicious, angry hatred and all the rest of it, because that's what people try to depict online. But I know you was disappointed. You really was disappointed that we are having this fragmentation.
Correct.
But now we have hindsight. I do think this was a healthy thing, and I think it was all for the best. And I always keep saying, I'll always keep on saying that the truth will present itself, irrespective of the light shone upon it. And I think everyone's just going to have to go on their journey now. And I think this is a really good point to round up on and finish up on, is the work that you guys are doing, in hindsight, will be looked back on as incredibly noble. Incredibly noble. Yes, there's great business opportunity here, but that's not a dirty word. That really isn't a dirty word.
It shouldn't be.
What it is that you guys are doing and how vigorously you guys have fought for this community will be looked back on incredibly, incredibly nobly. So I thank you, Jimmy. Thank you guys at nChain, everyone at CoinGeek, and everyone at anything in between who's supporting this behind the scenes. You are very much valued.
Appreciate that very much. We don't do this for validation, clearly, right? This is not a side we pick to.
You don't get it much as well, because I can tell you're taking it quite hard right now.
Have warm fuzzies thrown at us, but I appreciate that, and I want you and the rest of the BitcoinSV community to know we're just getting started.
Yeah, that's what excites me, because I know it.
We really are.
I know.
I see it. There's things I see coming. We're really just getting started, and so. We had to get through last year, and now it's time to build and create new things. And as I like to say, unleash Satoshi vision. It's going to be exciting.
Come on, 2019. Let's do this.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so do you want to drop any quick details about the CoinGeek conference coming up?
So the next CoinGeek conference is moving to Canada. You'll see a promo about this. Canada. And it will be May 29th. And 30th at the Carlu in Toronto, great city. And the May 29th will be a preview day dedicated to developers and more technical issues about BitcoinSV and its development and growth. May 30th is our main conference day, where we'll have a great lineup of speakers from all across the globe. You learn about developments with BitcoinSV, some great applications, enterprise uses, companies making great announcements, perhaps Bitstocks. And I guess and we're actually going to be announcing a hackathon, which you'll hear some things about. And finalists from a first ever BitcoinSV hackathon will be presenting at the Toronto conference for CoinGeek. And we'll conclude with a very personal conversation with Dr. Craig Wright about the beginnings of Bitcoin.
Wonderful.
Be there.
So thank you for coming down, Jimmy. Really, really appreciate it. And to all those that are watching, I hope you guys now view things with a slightly different light. And if you don't, it's completely fine. Just go off and do your research, look into the things it is that we've discussed today, and make your decision from there onwards. Peace, love, and light. All the best.
Be who you are.